it's Hipster GW again. So in last week's video, I went over how you can actually make sure that a character within your game world is actually looking at you whenever you're looking at them. So we use the first person blueprint in order to draw a line trace to see if you're looking at somebody. That just sort of was a given. And then most of the video was just covering if the other character in the world is looking towards your direction. But how do we actually make the first person character look at somebody and then pick up exactly what the first person camera is looking at? It's actually not that super difficult if you've never done it before. Once you do it, you probably might do it multiple times in multiple different types of games, if not most of the games that you make. So let's just go over how to actually do the math and how the nodes work within the system. Okay, so I just have a completely blank, brand new, fresh first-person template with an Unreal Engine 5.5. You can see we can walk around, but we don't have a reticle or anything in the middle of the screen. It has a system where you can go and pick up, I always forget how loud it is. You can go and pick up a first-person gun. I don't want that for this tutorial. It's just going to be in the way, so I'm going to delete it so we don't accidentally run into it during our gameplay. But essentially what we want to do is to keep everything here. Add a reticle in the middle of the screen. It's going to be very, very simple. You can make it more advanced later. And then we want to see, okay, if we're looking at the square and the square is something you can interact with, maybe it'll pop up something on the actual screen with the UI. We can make that system here. We'll do something very simple that then you can extrapolate for your own projects down the road. We can also make it so that you get a reference to exactly what you're looking at. Okay, so in order to make these changes, we're just going to use the built-in first-person character blueprint. And so we're going to go into the content, the first-person folder, blueprints, and then here we have the first-person character that will open up. You could recreate all this if you wanted to make your own individual one, but I'm just going to use what Unreal gives us out of the box. So if we go to viewport here, you can see this is actually what you're seeing. You're seeing out of this camera. We're not using these arms right now for anything. I'll just leave them there. They're not really hurting anything. But what we really care about is our capsule component. So this is what gives us physics in the world. And then the camera itself. So this is what we're seeing from this perspective whenever we click play, right? So this camera is actually moving around with the controller. We want to do a line trace or a ray cast. They call them line traces in Unreal Engine. From basically this point where this little circle sphere is, which is the exact dead center of the camera, and draw it out. Essentially, you see this red arrow? We want to draw it out in that direction, a certain distance, right? So we don't want to be able to see something that's 4 billion miles away, probably within, I don't know, say 20 feet or something like that, is we want to have some sort of a limit to what we're actually going to interact with, but in this exact direction. And so we'll set it up so that you have to be looking at something exactly. You have to look them dead set. So if this cube we were interacting with, we wouldn't be able to interact with it here or here. You'd have to be looking exactly at it. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to get a reference to it. So I'm going to create a new event down here. So I'm going to go down below all this. I'm going to go and do add custom event. And I'm just going to call this event look at. Now, I'm going to add an underscore and call it tick. This is just like my system, the way that I set it up. We're going to run this on tick. You don't have to run it on tick. You could run it on some sort of a timer. You could also utilize this look at in order to only fire whenever you want it to. So if you wanted it to only fire whenever you click, say, the E button to interact or something like that, you could utilize this for the exact same purposes. For this tutorial, we're just going to run it on every single frame. And before I forget, let's actually make sure that we call it on tick. So I'm going to call event tick. And then we're just going to call our look at tick event. Now you could just do all this logic right on tick, but in case there was anything else you wanted to do with it, with tick, this is just a little bit cleaner in my opinion. And then we can move this event and all of its contents here in a minute, anywhere within the event graph that we wanted to. Okay, like I said a minute ago, we want to draw the line trace out from the first person camera. So we have to get a reference to the camera. Luckily, we can just drag in the camera here. Now, if we think about it, what we want to do is we want to grab the location of the camera first, and then the line trace is going to ask us where we want the line to end. So the beginning is going to be the location of the camera, and then we want the line to end in the direction that it's looking. Luckily, we have something called get forward vector. So actually, before we do that, let's actually do our line trace. So I'm going to go here and type in line trace. Let's do line trace for objects right now. Based on your interaction system, you can mess around with either line trace by profile or line trace by channels, depending on how you want to set it up. For this, we're going to do just the objects, and basically what I'm teaching in this video, it's irrelevant to which node you choose. The node is only going to depend on which objects actually register as a hit, so you can mess around with that on your own time. Now, the line trace for objects does take an array of objects that you want to search for, so we're just going to make an array. Now, these are the different types of objects, right? So we have world static, let's add world dynamic. And let's add pawn in case if we have some sort of a character pawn that we want to interact with. This should basically make up most of the basics that we would have in our world. If you're making a more advanced game or something that's using any of this stuff specifically, obviously you would add those. Now, we're not going to add any physics bodies or projectiles or vehicles or anything into our game. So we're just going to keep it with world static, world dynamic, and pawn. Let me remove that dangling element that isn't relevant right now. And earlier I said that we want to have the line trace start at the location of the camera. So we're going to have our first person camera here, and we're going to do get world location. This is going to give us our vector, our 3D vector in space. That's going to be our start point. Now I'm going to move this node out of the way so that we can see more stuff from our first person camera. And the other thing we want is the forward vector. So we're going to say get forward vector. And this essentially says, hey, we're pointing in this direction. This is the direction that we're looking at from the camera's perspective. Now, we don't want just this. What we have to do is say, hey, we want it to look out, say, 500 units. So what we will do is we will multiply this by some sort of a variable. Now, anytime that you click multiply in Unreal Engine 5, it's going to give you this vector times vector node. I like to just select a float here, and then I can just multiply by a float so you don't have to deal with the vector. So let's just say 500 units. This is an arbitrary number, and you can mess around with it for your purposes. Now, what I'm about to do next is a very common mistake that I have made in basically every time that I've ever set up a system like this. So we'll fix it in a second. I'm going to plug this directly into the end of the line trace. And now let's actually get our line trace to be plugged in. So it's going to run on tick. Right up here, we're running look at tick on tick. And then we are running this line trace for objects here. And let's draw a debug for one frame. So we're running it every frame. We're going to draw a debug line each frame. And then let's go and just debug this a little bit to see what we're actually looking at. So I'm going to do a print string. And what we want to print is, hey, let's look at the object in the world that we're looking at, and let's just print it to the console, or print it to the actual window. Now, outside of this line trace for objects or any of the line traces, you get this out hit structure. So you want to break the structure. You're going to say break hit results. And then this gives you a bunch of stuff that actually tells you, hey, this is where your line trace started, and somewhere between where it started and it ended, you hit something. And then whatever you hit has a bunch of information on it. Now, not all this information is necessarily going to be relevant, but if you hit an actor, this is what we're going to use. So we're going to say, hey, let's look at the display name of the actor that we actually just hit. You can also check if you hit anything. So if you're looking in 500 units in front of you and you don't hit anything, this Boolean is going to be false. So if you want to make sure that you're not getting some sort of a null value or whatever, you can always make sure that you run this through a branch node. Okay, and you see this isn't going to work exactly right off the bat. Let's compile and save. Let's go back to our main first-person map. Let's click play. And you can see it says we're looking at the cube. Now we're looking at different cubes. We're We're not sure exactly which cube we're looking at. Oh. Okay, actually here, let's take off the world static. Let's not have world static because it's actually registering everything. It's registering all these cubes that actually make up the world. So that was my bad. Let's try and see if we're... Yeah, so you see we're not registering these main static cubes in the world right now. But also it doesn't register these cubes. Are these cubes not... I assumed that these cubes were dynamic. Okay, so that was my bad. I didn't realize that these blue cubes in the world, not these gray cubes that actually just make up the ground and the walls and everything like that. These cubes are not registered with the collision preset of world dynamic like I thought they were. They're registered as physics actor. So let's go and add one more pin to our make array here. Let's do physics bodies. I think this should work now, but you're gonna see the one error that we have with the way that we have our forward vector going out 500 units, and it's not gonna actually register the way that we thought it should. So we're looking right at them. Now, what the heck? We're hitting this random cube over here? Something's going wrong, so we're not actually looking at something and registering what we're looking at. Our line trace is like way wonky. What the heck is it doing? Now that we're in the first person map, we can click F8 where you just eject out of our first person. And you see right here, it looks like you're sort of looking in the right direction, right? So we're actually looking at that cube. So it kind of looks like it's working. Here, let's go back into our first person, but let's look here to say the right. You can see we're still hitting that cube. So let's click F8. So yeah, so you see we should be looking this direction and we're looking this direction. Now we did something wrong, like I mentioned, with our logic here, because we don't want to just get the forward vector and then go out a set amount. What we have to do is also compensate where the first person camera exists in the world. And so what we have to do is we have to take this output from our forward vector and then we multiply it by whatever arbitrary number we make. And we want to add it to the world location. So I'm going to put this on the bottom pin. We're going to take the get world location. We're going to replace this end pin for our line trace. And now what we're doing is we're not only drawing the forward vector going out from this direction, but we're adding it to the actual location of where our camera is at. So this is going to essentially offset and compensate to make sure that we're looking in the right direction. But you can see that little red square. Now what that is that's our line trace, right? So remember we had the debug going on? Yeah, see, this is working, right? And so this is the direction that our camera is looking. We can make our camera exist in the world, I believe. We can go here and say hidden in, let's stop the game. We can turn off hidden in world. We can only eject from this view here. So let's play here. Let's click F8 to eject. And then, yeah, you can see it is working exactly right. So this is the direction that we're looking. But in the actual game itself, you're not going to want to have this little red square pop up only whenever you're looking at something. You want to have a little reticle on the screen that actually pops up. But let's just do a very, very, very simple UI widget that we just display on the screen that shows a little tiny square. So I'll just do it here in this blueprints folder. You can probably organize your project better than this. I'm going to go down to user interface. We'll do a widget blueprint. I'm just going to do the basic widget blueprint. And I'm just going to call this debug HUD. Just because this is only for debug purposes. If I were actually making a game out of this, I would make a whole separate HUD that would, look better and it would have better code than what we're about to do. So let's open that up. And in here, we're going to add a canvas panel just to display the window. But then all I'm going to do with this is just get an image. We're going to add the image to the canvas panel. We're going to set its size. Let's just set its size to something like 25 pixels by 25 pixels. Now it's here in the top left. What we want to do is change the anchor up here to the dead center. We want to change the position because now the position is offset to where it existed before. We'll just offset it to 0 and 0, but you'll see one more thing is it's not actually dead center. So this little square that's supposed to be our reticle is not actually centered to the center anchor point. And so we have to change the alignment to 0.5 and 0.5. So let's compile and save. We have this reticle here in the middle of the screen, but we are not showing it yet. So let's go into the first person character. Let's go to the event graph, and not on tick, but on begin play, which the default first person character does not use begin play. So I'm gonna move all of our tick stuff down a bit, and then on begin play, we have to call it here. And let's just create a widget. What do we call it? We called the widget name debug HUD. I'm gonna click it. I'm gonna click this little arrow button here. We have to add to viewport. Let's add to viewport. Let's compile and save. Let's go back and play. And now you see we have this square on screen. That's way too big, so real quick I'm gonna go back and change the dimensions. I had 25 and 25. Let's do 10 and 10. There you go. Now you can see what direction we're looking at. But yeah, you can see not only is our line trace interacting with this cube, it's interacting with the cube exactly in the middle of the screen, because the middle of the screen represents the middle of the camera, but going out 500 units. So we can see we're interacting with this cube. We can go back now and get rid of our debug line trace. So I'm going to turn that off, because essentially now we have this debug HUD with the reticle that's showing what direction we're looking at. And then you can see it still works. We're interacting with these cubes. Okay, so if that's all you needed, if you just want to know how you do a line trace out from the first person camera, and make sure that you get the math right, like it's completely common, and I've done it 100 times, where you forget to add it to the world location of the camera itself. And that's all you needed. You can end the tutorial here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to also make it so that we display on the HUD, on the UI, the name of the actor that you're looking at, and then we'll do a quick system to make sure that only things that you've decided as the developer that you can look at display on the screen. Because, you know, if this was in the world and we didn't want to look at this cube, what we could do is we could give it a tag and say, hey, you can interact with this one, and then the name appears on the screen. So I'm going to exit out of here. Let's go into our HUD. Let's just have at the bottom of the screen a text block. I'm going to add the text block to our canvas panel. Our text block, let's have it so that it's anchored to the bottom center. Let's change the location like we did on the reticle. Now with this, what we want is we want the X to be 0.5, but we don't want our text to be exactly at the bottom of the screen. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do 1 on the Y-axis of the alignment. Also do size to content just to make sure that it's evenly spaced. We could probably actually not do that and just give it plenty of space. And then our text itself will just have center justified. But again, we don't want it exactly at the bottom of the screen, so this is where we could actually do our position Y and decrease this to say like negative, let's do negative 100. Let's do an even number. And on the size, let's do 607 instead of 592. I'm going to compile and save. Now, we also want this to be a variable. I'm going to change the name. Let's say interactable name. And then this is the way that I set up my UI. I do underscore what type of element we're dealing with. And so we're dealing with a text element. I'm going to make it a variable so we can access it in the graph. So here in the function, let's make a graph so that it can change the name that's on the screen so that we don't have just text block, but we actually have the name of whatever we're interacting with that then we can call in our first person character in order to change it based on a variable. So let's just create an event is the way that I'm gonna go around it. Let's do add custom event. Let's do update interactable name. Now you want an input pin here, and let's do the name, And there's an actual, you could do text if you wanted to, but since there's an actual variable type called name, I'm just going to do that. It'll do the conversions of, you know, a string or a text to a name. So just for the simple purposes of the fact that I called the variable name, I might as well call the variable data type name as well. And then what we want to do is we want to take the variable element, right? So our interactable name text element. Now we're not going to change this directly. What we want to do is call a function called setText. You could also set the text directly, but I like to call the function here setText. We're going to plug it in. So whenever we call this update interactable name function, we will be able to call the setText function on our element itself. We're going to take this name, we're going to plug it in, and here's the conversion that I'm talking about. So it's going to convert the name to a text element there. So if you wanted to, you could just make this a text element, then remove this name conversion. Okay, so we compile save. Let's go back to the first person character. Now instead of printing this, let's go and actually call this function here on our debug HUD, but we haven't saved it to a variable. So before we add our HUD, we create our HUD here on begin play. Let's make a variable out of it. So I'm going to go right click on that, do promote to variable, and we'll do HUD. You can't see where I'm typing, unfortunately. We'll do HUD, and then I'm going to call it ref. HUD ref. We will set this variable, and then out from this, we will just clean up our nodes and add that to the viewport. And so we're doing the exact same thing as before, but now we have a reference to it after begin play. So now instead of printing the string, let's delete that. Let's go and take our HUD reference, which I have down here in the variables. Let's drag this out. And then we're going to call our event here, which we called update interactable name. So here we'll do update interactable name. Let's plug that in. So we're getting the out pin from the line trace. We're getting the display name, which is a string. We're going to plug that into the name variable here. It's going to do the conversion like I mentioned. So now, whenever we're looking at things, you see we have none. Pretty easy. So right now it's just registering none. This is literally what's coming out of the line trace. But then whenever we look at a cube, we can see we have SM. Why is it called CHAMFR cube? I never realized that's what they're called. I don't know what that stands for. But now let's say that we don't want it to say none when we're not looking at anything. We just don't want that element to appear at all. I think it's pretty simple. Let's go within our debug HUD here. I like to, whenever I do this, I like to do it in the same function or the same event. So I'm just going to add a Boolean and just have it say something like, something obvious like display, and then make it a Boolean. And so now we say, okay, we're updating the interactable name, but you can also update it to say, hey, we're updating it to nothing. And so here I'm going to do a branch node. So I'm holding B, clicking left click. We're getting a branch node. We're going to plug in our display Boolean here. Now, if you are displaying it so it's true, we're going to keep the logic the same. My noodles are getting kind of messy here. So we're going to plug our true pin into the set text. So we're keeping the logic the same. Now, it doesn't really matter what our text is whenever it's not on the screen, but whenever it's off the screen, what we want to do is take the same element as before. So I'm going to duplicate it with Control D. And what we want to do is set the visibility. So I'm going to set visibility. I'm going to use the function itself, not the variable. I'm going to use the function itself, and I'm going to set it to hidden. So we're going to hide it whenever we're not looking at it. But you see, we don't see it now, but we go up to something and it's not displaying, because what we have to do here is do the exact same logic as changing the name, but we also have to do the logic of updating the visibility itself. So we're going to duplicate this visibility function, the interactable name. You could also plug this in directly here too, but we just want to change the hidden to visible. Oh, but we're not calling it. We're not calling it. So I forgot one more thing. I totally forgot here. We're not calling it because, oh, we are calling it, but we're not changing this Boolean. This Boolean's always false. So we can turn the Boolean to true. But again, it still shows none. That's not useful to us. So what we want to do is also plug in this return hit. because remember, this Boolean says, hey, are we actually looking at something? And there we go. You can see we're actually looking at something. Now, the final piece of the puzzle is, let's say that we only want to interact with certain cubes here. What we can do is we can give them an actor tag that says interactable. So let's go back to the map. I'm gonna click on this cube. I think here we can do this. So let's do tag. And so you can see you can get an actor tag. We're gonna use an actor tag here. We're gonna click the plus here and type in interactable. You can type in whatever you want, but this name has to be spelled and typed out exactly right. I'm pretty sure it's case sensitive too, so I'm doing a capital I interactable. I'm gonna copy that just to play it safe. Now let's say that we only want to display that information if it has the interactable tag. So I'm gonna do it to a couple of these cubes, but not all of them. Let's go back, actor tags. Let's add a tag here for interactable. And then let's do this one over here. Actor tag, and we're gonna make them interactable. Now you can see it's just those three. All the other ones do not have the interactable tag. So here, outside of this break hit results in our first person character, or first person blueprint, here after the line trace, what we can do with this actor is we can say, let's get their tags, and we're gonna get an array of tags. Oh, actually, no, I think it has a function, has tag. Actor has tag, so let's use that one instead. So we're gonna say actor has tag. And then here we have none. We want to change this to our interactable. Now remember, get the spaces right. So if you have no spaces on each side, sometimes there's a dangling space here that you want to make sure that you delete. I have capital I interactable, has to be spelled 100% the same. Now, there's a couple of ways you could do it. You could do two branch nodes. What I think I'm gonna do is do an and Boolean. So I'm gonna say you both have to hit the line trace. So this has to be true, and the interactable has to be true. So I'm gonna do and bool for and Boolean. I'm gonna take this node, plug it in here. And so now it's only going to pop up if both we hit something and the actor that we hit has the interactable tag. Let's see if that works. Yep, there we go. So we're displaying the name. Not that one, not that one, not that one. But this one we're displaying the name, and I think it was this one over here. You see we're displaying the name. Oh, and you see here, the one problem that we have is we're accessing none. Okay, so this is actually a problem that we want to address because we don't want to have all those null references. So instead of saying, let's do this and this, we're gonna do two branch nodes. Or no, we'll just do one branch node. So if we don't hit anything here outside of our line trace, we're gonna do nothing. So only if we hit something, we'll go forward. I'm actually gonna get rid of the and Boolean node because now it's irrelevant because it's automatically true. And then outside of the actor hit tag, we're gonna do our display. And now what we're doing is, what was happening was we kept trying to pull the name from actors in the world that don't exist and don't have names. And so that none was basically a null reference. Oh, but once again, we have the text block. So what we could do is right off of the bat, oh, actually, no, here's what we have to do is, outside of this, what we want to do is call this update name and just set it to no display. So now it doesn't matter what this name is here, because if this is none, it's not going to display. We're running this on tick, so it's going to run on the first frame. But what we were doing was right out of the gate, once we hit begin play, it was just hitting this false because we hadn't interacted with anything yet. This line trace hadn't hit anything yet. So essentially our HUD kept this up here. I guess you could also just make this hidden by default. And then as soon as you hit something, it'll make sure that it, displays it. But I also just want to make sure that we're calling something here on this false. So it doesn't really matter what the name is, but we're just going to make sure that it doesn't display. And I think this should work out of the box. Yep, so you see that works. We're interacting with that, and then one more over here, we're interacting with this. All right, and then you could take this and extrapolate it to whatever system you want. Essentially, you could add this tag to any actor in the world, so it doesn't have to be just a character or a cube. But that's how you can make sure that, that you're actually interacting with only the things that you want to interact with. So if you had like some sort of character in the world and it was a pawn class, you just add that to the base character class, and it would apply to all of the pawns that you create going forward that derive from that class. And then, of course, you probably wouldn't want to do the display name. You would want to have some sort of a specialized name for all the interactable objects that you have. Maybe I'll make a video about that sometime in the future, but you would just want to have some sort of a function that gets called on all of them. You could do an interface would be the best way to do it. And then that interface could return the name for everything that has the interactable tag. So you just want to pair up everything that has this interactable tag, also has that interface, and that interface returns some sort of function that has the name, because this display name is what it's called in the map. So that's why you see, SMCHAMFER cube 9 and 18 and 4 and whatever the numbers are, because that's the name that they are here in the actual editor. That is the name that you want to have in the game. So you would want to update this for your purposes. But if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. If there's a different way that you go about this, I'm curious how you go about this. And if you think that it's better, let me know why. Because there's probably different ways to do this that are more efficient or better for whatever reasons. But let me know why. And if you want something like this in the future that's a little bit more in depth, where we actually implement it on, say, a pawn class or something like that, let me know as well. Thank you so much. This is Hipster GW, and we'll see you in the next one.